Silva sat in a U-shaped chair which had once been a splendid piece, but now much of the ivory inlay had fallen out and its general appearance was as battered as his tub. It squeaked with each of his movements, and he wondered how soon it would collapse. Entirely hopeful, he thought such a catastrophe will not occur in front of my officers. His aide, Attius, now stood near the chair and half a pace behind. Seated on a wooden couch to his left were Longus Julianus, his finance tribune, and Laricus Liberalius, his intelligence tribune. Next to them stood the tribune Metellus Nepos, a hopelessly dull man in Silva's opinion, yet invaluable for his skill at assault weapon construction. Just beyond him stood the centurion Lupercus Clemens, responsible for military discipline throughout the 10th Legion. He was a gaunt man whose frightening ugliness was only enhanced by the several wains that cursed his face. He had risen from the ranks and was the rather shy when in company with so many of equestrian rank, but Silva knew him to be totally dependable when it came to battle or family troubles within the legion. On Silva's opposite hand sat Maturus Arvianus, a tribune newly arrived from Rome. He was one of good family, Silva knew, although too much of a dandy for his taste. Whether he had any dedication other than fashion was still to be proven. Since his arrival, he had been charged with maintaining communications to the seacoast, the handling of the imperial post, and the exchange of messages by carrier pigeon among the 8 camps surrounding Masada. It should be an easy job, Silva thought, yet he had recently become aware of numerous complaints, and he intended to inquire the reasons this night. Next to Arvianus, lounging with the arrogance of a man who knew his job and also knew he was appreciated, sat Eumidius Fabatus. Silva had long admired his cunning and resourcefulness, and had many times openly praised his ability as a supply officer. What Fabatus can't buy, he steals. What he can't steal, he appropriates. And when all is lost, he makes it Fabatus. Fabatus was a great eater, which Silva considered an absolute prerequisite for an efficient supply officer. Ubrius Gallus brooded in the next chair, and Silva was certain he was thinking about his ramp, which had obviously become an obsession with him. Silva wondered if he should spend more time worrying about Gallus. Perhaps the ramp was twisting his mind. There had been nights when Gallus had sat silently watching the continuous parade of torches up and down the ramp, and no one knew when he slept, for at dawn he would be watching from the same place. Tonight, Silva thought, he looks like a cadaver, with one foot in his tomb. The Jews are killing us all, slowly, by degrees, by just waiting. What a subtle people. Or were they merely cunning? Gallus understood them. Remember how he stroked the great sunburned nose and pulled thoughtfully at the tatters of dead skin when you asked him about Sheba. What are you going to do with her? No man does anything with a woman during the first verses of infatuation. She does things to you. Therefore, you have no choice but to become reconciled to your servitude, bearing in mind, as you may be sure she does, that every passing day is in her disfavor. Nearly all women are so aware of this time element they instinctively rush to establish customs and certain intimate relationships between you now, while the juices of your desire are bubbling so merrily. Be assured your Jewess, like females of all origins, is anticipating the time when you will act and appear unbelievably younger in comparison with her. This accelerated aging is a phenomenon that nature seems to have arranged as a sort of compensation for those gullible years when we trot obediently about trying to satisfy some female's various whims. She knows this, and also knowing men are prone to habit, is laying the foundation for her survival long before her magic starts to fade. Now Silva remembered how he had then asked Gallus what he would do about Sheva if he were his affair. Would he take her to Rome? And Gallus had replied with a smile, I am not you, hence my answer can have little true merit. Apparently, however, you have convinced yourself life might prove intolerably empty without her, which means you are in the very last stages of capitulation. So before it is too late, may I suggest you test her. And you had asked Gallus how, if the wisest men in the world often seem plagued by marital troubles, how could you discover the real Sheba? And there had followed some of Gallus's basic engineering logic. He had yawned over his wine and said, try her sincerity. Is she simply an extremely fortunate Jewess who would exploit any Roman to the utmost, or is she perhaps actually enamored of you? A situation, I dare say, would be most unusual in this desert. The surest proof would be to give her a chance at your life. If she cannot bring herself to harm you, then you can be certain you have found a prize for a wife. If she kills you, then you will at least know you avoided a serious mistake. Ah, Gallus, you great nose leading a man. Here in this tent, so far from home, you are the true prize among all my officers. Near the entrance stood the centurion Rosianus Geminus, with his hirsute hands clasped around the vine staff, symbol of his office. He was the farthest from the row of lamps set along a low table in the center of the tent, and the light lost in the shadows, and his black beard left little to be seen about his face except his eyes. Jimenez was also irreplaceable. Silva thought. There stood a soldier's soldier. Thus far the meeting had gone so agreeably, it had occurred to Silva a cup of his best wine might be in order all around. At once he changed his mind. If his officers had a cup, which they would be obliged to accept if offered, he must join them, and the inevitable must happen. He would be outside in the starlight talking to the mountain of Masada again. No! This night there is too much work to be done, and because you are lonely does not mean they are. They can, if nothing better, find companionship in the mutual complaint about you. Their private situation is quite different from your own, and with the post leaving in the morning, they will be anxious to conclude this meeting and get off their letters home. Then there is your own report to be completed in time, and a reply to that fool of fools, Antonius Mamilianus, the architect. No, not a drop for anyone. The auspices seemed favorable this night, even without wine. Timoleon, chief surgeon of the 10th, now reported only 31 legionaries. unfit for full duty. Of these, a rock slide at the ramp had injured 8, and the same day a cavalryman had been kicked by a horse. One legionary had developed a goiter and was being treated with white hellebore. Timoleon also reported 11 cases of fever and 4 of erysipelas, the same as the previous week. There had been some increase in the prevalence of epinitis, all through the cohorts. Timoleon explained the angry pustules were doubtless due to the extreme heat, and he had recommended faithful treatment first with a lentil meal application and then polygonum, or green coriander. As long as the supply lasted, each man was advised to treat his own suffering. There was only 1 new case of leprosy and 6 of dysentery, all camps combined. One lad from Syracuse had been stabbed in the groin by a camp follower with whom he had only moments before being copulating. What was she trying to do, circumcise him? Silva inquired with a smile. If she was trying to make a Jew of him, she failed, sire. The physician bowed slightly and returned Silva's smile. We used all our skill to be sure he would breed for the Romans. I am pleased to report we succeeded. Since Timoleon, like all the surgeons, was a Greek and hence could not become privy to Roman councils, Silva dismissed him with a smile of commendation. When Timoleon had departed, Tribune Julianus rose to report on the provincial purse. He estimated the stipendium for Judea would amount to 4 million shekels, which translated into the legionaries' annual pay of 250 denarii per man, left the tenth with a comfortable margin for the rest of the year. This would be in addition to the tributum levied on Samaria and Galilee. It would be, sire, and as the trade along the coast improves, we may anticipate a direct tax upon land and business. If we can keep the peace, we may also expect considerable sums from indirect taxes of various nature, fees through auctions, perhaps a head tax when we are ready to take a census. We will keep the peace, Silva replied, and then wondered how he could be so positive. Was he willing to believe the old Jew made captive this very night who had said the people on the mountain would never come down? Julianus had, soon as we are finished with this fellow Eleazar, we want you to set up a proper customs service. We should not neglect that source of revenue. I have already prepared the following rates. Sire, which of course would be ad valorem. Julianus read from his notes in such a monotone, Silva could not resist yawning. Slaves, each 1 1/2 denarii. Horse, 1 1/2. Mule, the same. Suckling pig, 1/2 sesterce. Dressed hide, 1/2 denarius. Glue per 10 pounds, 1/2 sesterce. Sponges per 10 pounds, 1/2 sesterce. Wine per amphora, 1 sesterce. Perhaps that is a bit low? Silva held up his hand and said, "Thank you, good Julianus. I hardly think it is necessary to go through your whole list item by item. I am certain such a meticulous man as yourself has fixed the toils so that our revenues are sustainable without killing the goose." Silva was pleased to note the murmur of appreciation that floated amongst his staff. Would this human calculating machine ever sit down? However, Julianus droned on, I must warn you not to become overly optimistic. Since sea trade with this land, I have always entertained more hopes for the land trade, the former caravan routes perhaps. Of course, sire, I have estimated 25% at the frontiers and 5% between districts. Both would be ad valorem. There again, only if we can keep the peace and thus encourage traders to pass this way may we expect to profit. Silva next queried Metilius Nepos concerning the machines he was constructing for the final attack on Masada. The assault over tower had been constructed near the base of the ramp and now stood on the great wheels. It was ready for action except for the iron plating which would armor the entire forward side and 3 sides of the top 2 levels. And when will plating arrive, Nepos? It was brought by ship to Caesarea with forwarding orders for Jerusalem. We are no longer fighting in Jerusalem, Silva said, as acidly as he could manage. As much as he admired Nepos' way with the machines of war, he was not going to endure another of his excruciatingly dull orations, which were always, in sum, excuses for not having things done on schedule. We require the plating here in the desert, and we are going to need it very soon. Nepos' face remained placid in spite of his general's obvious displeasure. I was assured by Tribune Fabatus all the plates would be here in 10 days ago. Fabatus grunted and pointed a fat finger at Nepos. Now don't you go blaming me for your difficulties. I advised you the plates could have been here in 10 days ago, not would be. I told you a convoy was leaving Jerusalem and it would have sufficient capacity for your plates. You replied you were not ready yet, and that was the last I heard of the matter. He twists words, sire. By the gods I do not, Fabatus snorted. He turned sideways to lift his fat from the chair, and his jowls shook with the violence of his movement. I will not be insulted by a mere centurion. My people have brought him everything but the Vestal Virgins, and still he complains. Sit down, Silva commanded. He rubbed wearily at his bad eye and thought, the last thing I need is dissension between my 2 best officers. We require the plates, and we require them now. They are not here. Let us try to find out a way they are not here. Fabatus, you advised the plates could be here on a certain date. On what did you base your statement? I received word of a caravan bearing iron plates consigned to Nepos had left Caesarea over a month ago. The plates were extremely heavy, and the bearers would be able to make only a few miles each day. They proceeded down the coast as far as Joppa, where the centurion in charge managed to commander some donkeys. Even so, he lost some 50 bearers before he reached Jerusalem. Lost them? Some died on the way, some ran away. They always do. We make provision for a 30% loss along the coast. In practice, it works out approximately the same in the desert. More Jews die under their loads, but not so many run away. You knew then that the plates were in Jerusalem. I did, sire. That is how I reached the date of 10 days. It was only necessary to unite what was left of the original caravan with the next regular convoy. And where are the plates now? Tonight? Yes, right this very hour. I want to know exactly where they are. Fabatus hesitated and squirmed uncomfortably in his chair. He picked up a corner of his cloak, examined it as if it might there find an answer, then slapped it back down on his knee again. He worked his fat lips one over the other as if he had just tasted something rancid and said, Sire, I do not know. Why should the whereabouts of a convoy bound for Masada be a mystery? It is hardly 40 miles to Jerusalem. Even with my bad eye, I can see nearly half the way. Once a convoy leaves Jerusalem, it is more or less on its own. More or less, meaning there is no communication with it whatsoever. Precisely, sire. Then what is wrong? Silva turned to Arvianus and frowned. And that is your affair, Arvianus. Why haven't you remedied it? If you will forgive me, sire, good communications demand horses and messengers. I am short on both, and decent remounts are impossible to find in this land. For example, I have barely enough to carry the post in the morning beyond Tyre. What happens then? Does the imperial post just sit there 2,000 miles from Rome? No, sire. There is one night lost for the messenger to rest. Then he carries on to Sidon, where he hands it over to a new messenger, who comes down from Antioch with the Rome post. It has always seemed to me it would be faster to send dispatches by sea. Not at this time of year, sire, and it is not a reasonable way at any time. Silva leaned back in his chair and beckoned to young Attius. You will go at once to Centurion Lupus of the first cohort. He will detail 8 men as messengers and 16 of his finest mounts to the service of Tribune Arvianus. Tell him I know he is not going to like it, but we have little employment for cavalry here, and he had best accept the fact with his usual good nature. Silva turned back to Arvianus. You will find those iron plates by no later than noon tomorrow and report to me. From this night forward, I will expect a sharp improvement in all our communications, particularly between here and the seacoast. His voice hardly pausing, Silva addressed Tribune Liberialius, a tall, swarthy man without a trace of hair on his face or head. His skin shone with perspiration in the soft light, and the dampness so exaggerated the heavy lines and indentures about his face, Silva thought he appeared to be sculpted in polished marble. Have you learned anything more from the Jews who came down Liberialia? Not directly, sire. However, 2 of the men now guarding them are fluent in both Hebrew and Aramaic, of which I am sure the Jews are not aware. Hopefully, they will pick up something of value. What have you done with them? For the time being, they are confined in the southwest corner of the lower camp. They show no signs of wanting to escape and are heavily guarded. I rather believe they are glad to be here. Have you attempted to draw further information from them? Not as yet, sire. It would be my recommendation to scourge a few of them and see if there was not something they would care to add beyond what they have already offered. We will wait a day or 2 on that. That addle-headed young Cerealius had them knocked about enough. Now this elderly man who denies he is their leader and calls himself Ezra, I was rather taken with his manner. He seems quite different from the others. He's still a Jew, sire, and therefore not to be trusted. Silva massaged his crippled leg pensively. For a moment he seemed to have forgotten he was not alone. Then suddenly he studied the faces, bordering the shadows, as if hoping to discover some confirmation of his thoughts. But he found only an uncomfortable silence. Finally he said, What am I hoping for, of course, is a Jewish surrender before we have to go after them. I don't mind so much the trouble and expense involved in completing the ramp, but I'm distressed to count the number of legionaries we will lose during the actual assault. We will need those men for the later policing of Judea, and Rome has already indicated they will not furnish replacements. He paused and wiped the perspiration from his eyes. Dare he mention the heat? No, the less said about it, the better. But some ancient military magic, the secret fears of officers dripped right down through the men. Now there is another very important factor we must weigh most carefully. When we take Masada, we will make certain very few Jews survive, if any. He paused again and smiled at his listeners. Unless some of you would care to take one home as a souvenir, but in my opinion there are quite enough Jews in Rome. There was another murmur of amused appreciation, then Silva continued. I'm thinking of our future in Judea. If the Jews on Masada fight to the last, which they will probably do, or I mistake Eleazar, they could possibly become a symbol for all other Jews in Palestine, and such a development might easily become a potentially dangerous rallying point for a very long time. This was not the case with Jerusalem or any other of the engagements with these people. It is something we can live with well enough, but I envision a productive land here in the future, as self-governing as the Jews can ever govern themselves, and of course with us as their supreme rulers. We must remember that while we can eliminate most troublemakers, we cannot reach them all. If he has a symbol, it takes a very little more for a dedicated man to set an already restless people once more at our throats, or their own for that matter. For a profitable peace, which is the reason we are here, we must have people working instead of fighting. For this reason, I believe we should explore every possibility of taking Masada without actual conflict. I will listen to any recommendations. They followed a long and uncomfortable silence. Silva watched the staff look at one another and work their mouths and pinch their eyes as if each were on the very point of a momentous declaration. He gave them time to fold and refold their cloaks and to wipe the perspiration from their brows until finally, more amused than disappointed, he said softly to himself, "Brilliant." Their response had been no less than he had expected. Here were 6 tribunes, each entitled to wear the golden ring, and in the 10th there were altogether 50 centurions and 100 optiones and 100 ensigns, all of whom could be classified as officers, and yet nothing. All obedient, all willing as children if their father spoke, and who was their father? Silva sighed, and quite suddenly there was the taste of wine on his tongue, and a voice in the shadows of his tent seemed to whisper, "There is your answer. If no man will call you friend, if no man will challenge you because of fear of his position, and if the loneliness now returns and you sit as a solitary ghost with all the desert world waiting upon your next decision, then join with me. Not much, say no more than a cup, or at the most 2. Send these good old men away to chew on what you have already said, and let me this night once more be your companion." The chair cried out when Silva pushed himself to his feet, and immediately all the others rose expectantly. As Silva surveyed them, he thought, how splendid to the eye they are, how grand and solidary and imposing of mien. All true Romans, brave and devoted, and not a full brain among them. Let us sleep among all of this, Silva said quietly. May the gods inspire you. He raised his hand carelessly in reply to their farewell salutes, and even before they had all managed to slip out of the tent, he sat down heavily in the U-shaped chair. He saw his hand reach out to encircle an invisible cup, and he immediately clenched it into a tight fist. Then for some moments he sweated profusely, and though he made not the slightest movement, His breathing rapidly increased until he was panting. To distract his thoughts, he bit his lips until he tasted blood, and for a time the flavor of wine left him so that he could slump in his chair and close his good eye and call upon a lifetime of discipline to transport his mind afar. Yes, he was at last succeeding. There was the post to think about, not this one, but a post of long ago received in Gaul. There was that certain letter from Livia, which he could recite to this very day. To repeat it seized the mind. To linger over its every word and phrase, so much Livia, so like her very voice, held up a shield to weakness. My beloved husband, for the past month I have been debating ceaselessly within myself and as long as I dare on how to write this letter. It has always been the last wish of your wife to distress you in any way, yet I believe it better to explain now, rather than have you return to find me gone and then spend the rest of your own life secretly wondering why. Dear one, my reward would be if you always pronounce the name Livia with affection. I have this day made sacrifice to Minerva in your behalf and to Poseidon in my own. I write these last words to you because even if you were here within the touch of my hand, I am now incapable of telling you what my heart demands. You will remember the increasing huskiness in my voice which once before you left for the north and we were having one of our very special, very privately gay evenings. You laughed so tolerantly about saying, "Indeed, it is a wonder to me all women do not suffer some loss of voice, considering how they belabor the instrument." How true, dear one. And I was as guilty as any other of our circle. On your return you may inquire of the physicians concerning my affliction, even though I doubt you will learn very much. The more honest ones confess to be mystified. The others burn incense and roll their eyes and chatter away interminably about Cacophilus and this or that potion to effect a cure. The only matter they all seem to agree upon is that the lesions in my throat will soon prevent me from ever making an intelligible sound again, and that I may soon join my ancestors. It is as if the gods so envied our mutual joy in each other they sought revenge and have by this cunning device managed to strike us apart forever. Dear one, I wish to leave you this side of death while we both breathe and sense the life of the other, while even our thoughts are in harmony, though you may be far away. Forgive me for being such a child, but the other side of death holds no promise for me. I have never met anyone who makes the slightest sense on the subject. Of one thing only am I now certain, other than my everlasting love for you. I am not going to let death come to me. I will go to it. I beg you not to deduce from this that I have lost my sanity, for such is not the case. On the contrary, during these past few weeks I seem to have new perceptions on almost everything, a clarity of thought and value that often astounds me. I see the leaves of the acacia tree in our garden in a different way than ever before. They dance in the slightest breeze, twirling as no human performers may ever do, and tell me over and over again how the beauty of life is so short we must never spill a moment of it. I see light where I never saw light before, in the fringes of summer clouds, in the shimmer of a dewdrop that must also, after a short span of life, vanish forever. And why not, dear one? Is it not better for me to leave the feast now while my face and silhouette are still alluring to you? Oh, it is very well for people to say, let us grow old together, or worse, what a lovely old couple. Lovely? Not for your Livia. And now, even if I desired, I could hardly be classified as a comfort to any man in his later years. You have often told me that as a soldier it would be most fitting if you died in battle. So it is with me. Funerals to honor a great man for his deeds are morbid enough, but for a woman who has done nothing else in the world but love her husband, not even the giving to him of a child, there is no excuse for the tears of mourners. While I must confess my wretched femininity, by hoping you will grieve, at least for a time, there is certainly no honest cause for you to brood over my ashes, or otherwise mark my 25 years of earthly citizenship with cold monuments. So it is my intention to spare you and my family those punishing, though obligatory, rites. Tomorrow I will journey to Neapolis, where I have arranged to take a vessel for Capri. I have specified the passage must be made at night. It is my determination to look down at the stars reflected in the sea and join them. Dear one, may the gods protect you. Farewell. Silva rose slowly from his chair. He raised his two fists toward the top of the tent as if it were the sky, and held them there, his whole body trembling. Ah, Mars, my patron god, rescue me from this perpetual night. Defeat me or give me victory, but do not leave me wandering in the wilderness so alone. He lowered his fist and went to the table. There he poured himself a full flagon of wine. Valerius Valens, a legionary of the first maniple of the 2nd century, sat in his tent that was designed to accommodate 10 men, but was now crowded with more than 15 of his comrades, who had also just been relieved of guard duty along the circumvallation. They were gathered around the single oil lamp, listening mostly to Marcus Fronto, a grizzled decurion of the first cohort. Though Fronto dominated the group, there were times when one or the other of Valens' uninvited guests would speak their minds, and what they had to say made it extremely uncomfortable. It was suffocatingly hot in the tent with so many bodies, and so airless the flame of the little oil lamp frequently appeared to have lost its struggle for life. Even with a watchful guard posted outside the tent to warn of the overly curious or the approach of an officer, Valerius Valens was nervous. The 10th Legion had been his life, so much so that he had memorialized its passage wherever he had marched with it by carving leg X foot on anything from a tree to a stone. It was a habit common to many legionaries who found it an economical way to pass the inevitable waiting time known to all soldiers. It costs money to play at dice, but nothing to carve. So they vied with each other for artistic grace in the lettering. LEG was the customary abbreviation for legion, X the Roman symbol for 10, and fret was particular to the 10th, meaning fretensis, and signifying the Straits of Messina. where they had long been garrisoned prior to Palestine duty. Thus the marchings of many of the legions across the land were often recorded, and sometimes a soldier in Britain or Africa would hope to advise others on his fate and transfer by carving his name, unit, and date on anything at hand. Now Valerius Valens found relief from the tension surrounding him by scratching in the soft stone bench on which he sat. He employed a broken dart for the purpose, and somewhat to his surprise discovered that he was again carving the familiar old leg X fret. "You heard the Jew, Fronto," the Decurion was saying to the others. "You heard what the old man said about the heat, and you have heard me, who has served in Africa from one end to the other, and knows what heat can do. Now let us listen to Plinius Severus here, who knows all there is to know about Jews." A tall, thin legionary asked dryly, "Even more than Silva knows these days?" But no one laughed. Plinius Severus was small for a legionary, yet wiry and able to write his full name, and he had fought well at Jerusalem, so he was respected by the others. He was a garrulous man, and his peculiarity, discordant voice, was known throughout his corps. Now he rasped. "Well, first he said his name was Ezra, and then he asked my name, and he didn't talk like a Jew at that, but more like a human being. And he said all that we've already heard about, and how we are below the level of the sea and all that, and how we're all going to melt pretty soon. And he asked how could we fight for a general who was drunk all the time, and we heard that too. Get to the important part," Fronto insisted. Plinius Severus hesitated because he wanted to savor his sense of importance. Never before had he commanded such an attentive audience. "Finally," he said, "the thing you have to understand is that most Jews have a gift. They can see what is going on to happen, and this man Ezra said he saw our blood boiling 35 days from today. Why don't you have yourself circumcised?" asked Vespero, a stolid legionary from the 3rd cohort. "Next you'll be telling us you believe in a God that can't be seen." Salus Proculus, who was also from the 3rd cohort, laughed and said, "Severus, you don't know anything at all about Jews. I tell you, they wouldn't direct a thirsty man to a spring. I tell you, they are a race of lepers, and I know for a fact they have secret laws that tell every tribe they can fatten and slaughter one Gentile a year. They eat his entrails and take an oath to hate anyone who refuses to worship their invisible God. You want me to believe such a wild and mysterious people knows what will happen next month?" Terentius, who was a cavalryman, and thus considered an outsider, said, "We should have more pay for being here. After I finish paying for hay, my own ration, my boots, leggings, and the camp Saturnalia fund, I'm docked 120 denarii. Then another 50 goes to my account, which I may not live to use. I say we should have something extra." "We are getting away from the point of this meeting," Fronto countered, and now Valerius Valens began to carve more industriously because he sensed that he was about to play host to the very subject he feared. "Whether we believe the old Jew or not, we should decide what we are going to do if the heat comes down like he claims it will. In other words, are we willing to dig our own graves right here in this putrefying desert and not even make a protest?" "Such as?" Proculus asked cautiously. There was a moment of heavy silence. Fronto examined the anxious, sweating faces leaning toward him in the feeble light. "We are men," he said softly, "and we are not unarmed. Do you suppose that Silva could oppose us if he stood alone?